Yo, what's going on guys? Today we're going to be ranking all the styles in Untitled Boxing Game. Before we get into the video, I'm going to be telling you guys how we're going to rank them to begin with. So yeah, enjoy the video. Alright, so let's get started. I have all the fighting styles and I'm going to be ranking them from S, A, B, C, and D. But also I'm going to go in depth when talking about their strengths and weaknesses, and also I'm going to rank them according to these categories I made. These categories I made are going to include damage, defense, mobility / reach of the punches, and they're going to be rated by stars, 5 stars being the best. And lastly, I'm going to end it off by talking about my personal preference, and then after all of that, I'm going to add it up, and that's how I'm going to rank them. So yeah, let's get started. Alright, so let's talk about Smash. Let's be honest, this class is mid as hell. Let's talk about its damage. First of all, its damage is above average, but at the cost of its slow attack speed, making it easily dodgeable and perfect blockable. So I'm gonna rate its damage a solid 4 out of 5. Now let's move on to its defense. Its defense is pretty solid as well. It can tank a few hits before breaking, so I'll rate it a good 3 out of 5 on defense. Now for the mobility / reach of this class, which is absolute rat shit. I'm not saying that's bad, but it's bad. Any experienced player that you'll go up against will have no problem dodging and punishing your slow attacks. Especially when you're matched up against a good Hitman or a decent hands low player, you're just not going to hit them. So sadly, I'm going to rate it a solid 2 out of 5 on mobility / reach. Even though its dodge isn't that bad, it's basically the only thing keeping me from rating this shit a 1 out of 5. Alright, so finally for my personal preference, I personally think this class is hot ass, but I'm gonna be fair and say it has some potential and give it a solid 2 out of 5. So yeah, I think this class belongs in the C tier. Alright, so now we're gonna talk about Long Guard. I actually used to main this style for a long time before I switched off, but yeah, I think it's pretty solid. For damage, I'm gonna have to rate it a solid 3 out of 5. In its description, it legit says that its damage is slightly weaker, so yeah, it's pretty underwhelming sometimes. So moving on now, we have defense, and I'm also gonna have to rate it a mediocre 3 out of 5. It's pretty average, nothing crazy. It breaks after maybe 4 to 7 light punches, a few heavies, depending on the class you're playing against. So yeah, it's nothing too good. Alright, but now we're actually going to move on to its strong point. It's mobility / reach. It's actually pretty insane, and I'm going to have to rate it a solid 5 as well. It's great for keeping your distance from people because not a lot of people use this class. Its timing makes it easy to land punches, and because of that crazy range, you can see in this fight, I get a ton of free hits. And lastly, for personal preference, because I used to main this class, I'm a bit biased, but for me, it's a solid 4 out of 5, and I think it's really underrated because people underestimate its reach, and yeah, that's why I think Long Guard maybe belongs in low A, high B. I'm gonna just put it in B for now. Okay, now we got basic. I didn't really want to do this style because who the fuck uses basic, but yeah, let's just get it started. For damage, it's mid. For defense, it's pretty mid. And for mobility / reach, it's really mid. And finally, for my personal preference, I'm going to be rating it a solid 1 star and putting it in D tier. Alright, now that we're finally out of the uncommon tier and can actually start talking about some of the good fucking styles, alright, we're going to start off strong with counter. Counter is a super strong class where you deal more damage when you hit counters. If you don't know what a counter is, you're fucking stupid. A counter is basically when they try to hit you, but you hit them first. This means you're going to be doing like double the damage. Like if you hit like counters back to back, especially if you hit a counter of your heavy attack, dude, you're going to be doing like 30% of their HP, bro. It's fucking crazy. So I'm gonna have to give this class like a 5 when it comes to the damage category, man. It's pretty solid. Alright, so now we're gonna look at its defense. I'm gonna keep it real. All the defenses are the same. I'm gonna give it a 3. The only ones that are different are like Trickster and Slugger. Alright, so we're gonna talk about its mobility and reach now. It actually has a really solid dash, but its reach isn't anything special. It's like basic, bro. So I'm gonna give it like a solid 3 or 4, man. I don't know. I'll give it a 4. Alright, moving on to my personal preferences now. I'm gonna give it like a good 4. I actually used this for a really long time and I enjoyed it like a lot. Like I couldn't get any legendaries or anything, so I just stuck with counter like for a super long time, and it dealt like an insane amount of damage to people who didn't know how to dodge. So yeah, I think it fits perfectly into like high A, maybe low S tier. I'll just keep it in A for now. Okay, so boom, we're on to Corkscrew now. I'm gonna keep it real. I haven't really played around with the style that much, so some of my opinions on it might be dog shit, like the whole video. But from what I know, it actually seems pretty decent. It has this unique trait where you heal faster after taking damage, which is pretty cool, and I think could make for some pretty unique playstyles. For damage, it has a really good heavy attack that does some good solid damage with some really good reach to it too. Its light attacks are pretty average and it gets the job done. So for damage, I'm gonna rate it a good 3.5 out of 5. Moving on now, we're going to talk about its defense, which is really mid, like all the other classes. Actually except counter, dude. Counter actually had a really good solid block. But besides that, yeah, I would give Corkscrew like a 3 for defense. Now we're going to talk about its mobility / reach. Those punches are slow, its heavy attack actually has some really good reach, and the class actually has a really solid dodge too, which makes it pretty balanced, so I'm gonna have to give it a 3.5 as well. I think it's solid. Now for my personal preference, because I haven't really played this class that much, I don't think I'm really entitled to talk too much about my personal thoughts, but after thinking about it a little bit and like thinking about like the potential of it, I'm gonna give it like a solid 3. Even though like all classes have potential, I just think others are better than this one. So yeah, I think it belongs in maybe top B. High B. So let's move on to this disaster of a class. Do you want to look goofy as fuck? Well, Trickster is for you. I feel like this class is just a watered down version of Hands Down. Let's start with its damage. It has a pretty underwhelming light attack, but a solid heavy attack that can be easily spammed because of its low windup time. Because of this, I'm gonna go ahead and give its damage a 4. Moving on now, let's talk about its defense, which is basically fucking non-existent. Its block is one of the weakest in the game, right next to Slugger. So for that, I'm gonna give it a solid 1. Now let's start talking about its biggest advantage, its mobility / reach. It's basically the only thing making this class viable. If you play right, you can run around the whole match with your goofy ass noises and make your opponent rage quit. So because of that, I'm gonna rate it a solid 5 for mobility / reach. And finally, let's talk about my personal opinion of this class. I'm personally not a mentally deranged Discord moderator with cerebral palsy and Down syndrome, so I'm gonna rate this class for me a 1 out of 5 and put it in the C tier because it doesn't deserve to have any more players. Did you try to get this class because you watched Haji no Ippo and then realized that you're a dog shit at the game and rolled it off? Yeah, well, me too. I'm gonna be honest, this class is really bland and has nothing really special to it. Starting off with its damage, which is a little bit above average, dealing solid damage with its heavy attacks and light attacks, I'm gonna give it a solid 4. Moving on now, let's talk about Ippo's defense, which is actually pretty decent. It can tank a lot more punches when compared to other classes, so I'm gonna give it a good 4 as well. Now let's talk about its mobility / reach. I low-key don't even know what to give it. It has decent range, but it's slow as fucking bricks. But it also has a really good dodge, so I'm gonna go ahead and just give it a nice solid 3. I just think the punches are too slow and it hinders the class a lot when going up against good players. You're just gonna be getting perfect blocked and dodged the whole entire time. Now lastly, let's talk about my personal preference. In my opinion, I think the class is legit the definition of mid. It does everything mediocrely, so I'm gonna give it a 3 and put it in low A tier right next to counter. Do you want to be dashing around the whole ring like the hash slinging slasher? Well, the hands low style is for you. Let's go ahead and start with its damage, which is really solid. It has a fast throwing light attack with good range and a hard hitting long range heavy to complement it, so I'm gonna have to rate its damage a good solid 4. Moving on to defense now, I'm gonna have to give it a 3. Like every other class, it's nothing special and it blocks works the same as everything else, not being too weak or too strong. Alright, now let's talk about its bread and butter, its mobility and reach. Its mobility and reach is actually pretty insane. It has one of the best dashes in the game right next to Trickster, and the reaches on his punches are similar to long guards, so for that, I'm gonna have to rate it a really good solid 5. Lastly, let's talk about my personal preference. I low-key think this class is pretty decent, but something about it just feels easy to dodge for me, but that's just me. I see huge potential for this class, so I'm gonna give it a solid 4, and I'm gonna go ahead and place it in low S tier. Okay, so boom, we're finally talking about the man himself, Slugger. Slugger is super controversial, but if you think Slugger's ass, you're just stupid. You haven't fought a good one, or you're coping about them being able to time their heavies and you're having a mental breakdown. You're probably like,
this class is really bad because Slugger has a bad block and it's really slow.
But bro, Slugger is that guy. Let's start off with its damage, which is easily a 6 out of 5. It has insane damage, and being able to time your heavy attacks and hold it makes it so that hitting combos is easy as fuck. Especially on noobs, you're gonna knock them out in 5 seconds with like 10 punches. Moving on now, let's talk about shit block. I'm gonna have to rate this thing a 1. It's one of the worst in the game right next to Trickster, but it doesn't really matter if you can perfect block and dodge well. Let's talk about that mobility / reach now. The reach on the full charge heavy attack is so crazy that even if you dodge back, if you're against the ropes of the wall, you're gonna get hit anyway, but the dash on it isn't too good, so I'm gonna have to rate this thing a solid 3. Lastly, I'm gonna talk about my personal preference. I love Slugger, and any of you Slugger haters are just stupid and think that because it's slow, you're gonna win, but then I perfect dodge your ass 3 times in a row and you're at half HP. So for that, I'm gonna have to give it a 5 and put it as the strongest style in the game with the highest potential. Alright, so now that we're gonna move on to my boy Hitman, if you made it this far into the video, thank you, man. This class is fire as hell and takes about like 2 brain cells to use, so it's perfect for most of you 12-year-olds. Let's go ahead and start off with its damage, which is pretty amazing. It has good flicker punches that are hard to dodge, and they also have some decent range as well. So I'm gonna have to give its damage a good 4 out of 5. Moving on now, let's talk about its defense, which is normal and mediocre, like every single other class, so I'm just gonna give it a 3 and keep moving on. Now that we're on its mobility / reach, it's actually surprisingly shit. It has a really bad dodge, but it has some really good range punches, so I'm gonna have to give it like maybe a solid 3. Alright, so let's talk about some of my personal opinions of this class. I think it's hella overrated, but it's not bad at all. It has some downsides that makes it balanced like any other class, so I'm gonna give it a solid 4 for potential and put it right in the middle of S tier, right next to Hanslow. Alright, so yeah, that's about it for the tier list. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, comment. If you disagree with me or something, yeah, just hash it out in the comments, man. I'm always active in the Discord on the Untitled Boxing Game. I was actually editing this video in their Discord for a while, so yeah. I'm trying to do this YouTube thing as like a side thing. So Yeah, thanks for watching. See ya.